My wife thought I'd never find out until I took hair from our bed and had it tested. When the lab called with the results, my hands went cold. I left the report on her pillow with a note. Explain this before I do something permanent. I never thought I'd be in this situation. You read about these things, see them happen to other people, and you think, damn, that's rough, but you move on because it's not your life. Until one day it is. Until one day, you wake up and everything you thought was real is a lie. My wife and I had been married for 10 years. 10 years of what I thought was a solid, happy marriage. We had 2 kids, a house in a nice neighborhood just outside of Chicago, and a life that, from the outside, seemed perfect. People used to tell me they envied what we had. They'd see us at barbecues, at school events, holding hands, laughing, and they'd say things like, you guys are goals. I believed it too. I thought we were one of the lucky ones. I thought love like ours was supposed to last. Then, little things started happening. Sophia got distant. She used to text me cute messages during the day, send me memes, little, thinking of you, texts. Those stopped. At first, I brushed it off. People get busy, right? Work, life, kids. But then she started working late more often. She'd come home exhausted, barely say 2 words before going straight to bed. The intimacy between us changed too. She wasn't interested as much anymore, and when we did sleep together, it felt different. Off. Like she was going through the motions. I asked her about it once. She got defensive. Said I was imagining things. Said she was just stressed. And maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because the alternative meant admitting something was wrong, and I wasn't ready for that. Then, one morning, I found a hair on my pillow. It was long, dark, and definitely not hers. Sophia has blonde hair. Always has. I don't have any sisters. We don't have female friends who stay over. I stared at it for a long time, turning it over between my fingers, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was from work? Maybe one of her coworkers? Maybe, but no. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The hair was too out of place. I tried to let it go. I really did. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being crazy, that I was reading too much into a single strand of hair. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. So I did something drastic. I took the hair, put it in a plastic bag, and sent it to a private lab. It was a shot in the dark, really. I didn't expect anything to come from it. Just a way to put my mind at ease. But then the guy on the phone mentioned they could compare it to my DNA and check for any matches. That part was just a whim, because the only thing worse than finding out my wife was cheating would be if the hair belonged to someone related to me. I spent the next few weeks trying to act normal. It wasn't easy. Every time Sophia kissed me, touched me, said, I love you, it felt fake. I started watching her more closely. She'd smile at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. She'd laugh at my jokes, but it sounded forced. Maybe I was looking for signs where there weren't any, but I didn't think so. Then, one afternoon, I got a call. It was the lab. The guy on the other end of the line sounded hesitant, like he didn't want to be the one to tell me whatever he had to say. Sir, I have your results. My throat went dry. Go ahead. This hair doesn't belong to you or your wife. But, there's something else. I gripped my phone tighter. What? It's a close familial match to you. I felt something in my chest tighten. My stomach dropped. Meaning. The DNA suggests it's from a sibling. Or a child. A child. The words repeated in my head, over and over. My mind went into overdrive, running through every possibility. I have a brother, but he lives in New York and hasn't visited in years. I don't have sisters. That left one possibility. My father. I stood there, phone pressed against my ear, unable to move, unable to think. Sir? I hung up without another word. I didn't go home right away. I drove. Just drove aimlessly around the city, trying to process what I'd just heard. My wife was cheating on me. That much I had suspected. But with who? That part made me feel sick. I finally went home that night, my hands shaking as I unlocked the front door. Sophia was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Like our life was normal. Like she wasn't sleeping with my father behind my back. I didn't say a word. I went upstairs, printed out the results, and left them on her pillow with a note. Explain this before I do something permanent. She walked into the bedroom a few minutes later. I stood by the window, arms crossed, waiting. The second she saw the papers, she froze. Her face went white. What is this? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't move. I sent the hair to a lab. She looked at the results, then at me. I could see it in her eyes, the panic, the guilt, the realization that there was no way out of this. Whose hair is it, Sophia? My voice was calm. Too calm. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I stepped closer. It's my father's, isn't it? Her lower lip trembled. She let out a choked sob and collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. I didn't want you to find out like this. Like this. Like this. I don't even know how long I stood there, watching my wife fall apart in front of me, knowing I would never touch her again, never hold her again, never look at her without feeling disgust. I turned and walked out of the room. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do next. I walked out of the bedroom and went straight to the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a glass from the cabinet. I didn't even know why. Maybe I thought drinking some water would stop the rage building up in my chest. Maybe I just needed to do something, anything, to keep from walking back upstairs and completely losing it. From behind me, I could hear her footsteps. Slow, careful, like she wasn't sure if I was about to snap. Please, she whispered. Please, just talk to me. I turned around so fast she flinched. Talk to you. My voice was sharp, bitter. What the hell am I supposed to say, Sophia? Oh, honey, I'm so glad you and my father have been screwing behind my back. Let's have a family dinner and talk about it. Her face crumpled. I never wanted this to happen. I laughed. Actually laughed. Loud and ugly. Yeah? Did you trip and fall onto his D? Stop. She put her hands over her ears like a child. Just stop. I slammed the glass down on the counter so hard I was surprised it didn't shatter. How long? I asked, my voice dangerously low. She wouldn't look at me. It doesn't matter. How long? She swallowed. I could see her chest rising and falling too fast, like she was trying to breathe but couldn't. 2 years, she whispered. Everything inside me went cold. 2 years. I nodded slowly, staring at her like I'd never seen her before. 2 years, I repeated. While I was taking care of our kids. While I was working overtime to pay for this house. While I was kissing you goodnight, you were... I couldn't even finish the sentence. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I let her cry. I didn't care. Instead, I grabbed my phone and did something I should have done the second I got that lab result. I called my mother. It rang twice before she answered. Hey, sweetheart, she said. Everything okay? No, nothing was okay. Where's Dad? I asked, my voice tight. There was a pause. In the garage, I think. Why? Get him inside. Now. She must have heard something in my tone because she didn't ask questions. Hold on. I waited, staring at Sophia the whole time. She sat on the floor now, knees pulled up to her chest, rocking slightly. Good. Let her sit in her mess. Then I heard my father's voice on the phone. Hey son. What's up? I clenched my jaw. My fingers curled into a fist at my side. You and I need to talk. Silence. Then, in a voice too careful, too calm, he said, I don't know what you mean. My grip tightened on the phone. Don't do that. Don't insult me like that. I know. I could hear his breathing. The slight hitch. The hesitation. You know what? He asked, still playing dumb. I got a hair tested, Dad. A hair from my bed. I made sure to drag out the last word. To make it hurt. More silence. Then, finally, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, he said, Son, I'm sorry. Something inside me snapped. You're sorry. I didn't mean shut up, I hissed. My body was shaking. You didn't mean for what? To sleep with my wife? To lie to my face? To make a fool out of me in my own home? His breathing was heavier now. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed again. It felt sharp and ugly in my throat. Yeah? Well, congratulations. You did. There was a muffled sound on the phone, like movement. Then my mother's voice. What's going on? What are you talking about? And then it hit me. She didn't know. She had no idea. For the first time since I got the test results, I felt a new kind of sickness settle in my gut. My mother. She was going to break when she found out. I could hear my father talking to her in the background, his voice low, trying to calm her down, but it was too late. I made sure of that. Mom, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Go to the bedroom. Now. Why? Because you need to read the papers I just texted you. I hung up before she could say anything else. Sophia's head snapped up. Her face was streaked with tears. What did you do? I glared at her. What I should have done a long time ago. Her whole body started trembling. She doesn't deserve this. I stared at her, stunned. She doesn't deserve this? I let out a bitter laugh. She doesn't deserve this? And what about me, Sophia? What about my kids? What about the fact that the last 10 years of my life have been a joke? She wiped at her face, sniffling. I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear. I shook my head. Stop saying that. Because it did happen. And the worst part? I still didn't know why. I sat down at the table, rubbing my temples. Tell me, I muttered. She looked at me, confused. Tell you what? I lifted my head. My eyes burned, my throat raw. Why? She flinched. Looked away. Took a deep breath. And then she whispered, because he made me feel alive. I went still. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. He made her feel alive? I pushed back from the table so fast the chair screeched against the floor. Get out. She shook her head, panicked. Wait, I get out. She ran out of the kitchen. I heard her grab her keys, heard the front door open, then slam shut. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I stood there, staring at nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A text. From my mother. Tell me this isn't true. I stared at the text from my mother, my hands shaking. Tell me this isn't true. I had nothing to say. What was I supposed to say? That I made it all up? That my father hadn't been sneaking around with my wife for the last 2 years? That I hadn't found out by sending a stray hair from my own bed to a lab like some kind of goddamn crime scene investigator? No. There was no getting around it. She needed to know. She deserved to know. I forced myself to call her. She picked up instantly. Her breathing was shaky, uneven. She had seen it. Mom, is it true? Her voice was raw, fragile. Please tell me it's not true. I closed my eyes, my jaw tightening. It's true. I heard something crash on her end, like a glass shattering against the floor. Then a muffled sob. Then silence. And then she whispered, I think I'm going to be sick. A sharp burst of laughter escaped my throat, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, I muttered. Welcome to the club. She didn't say anything for a long time. Just her shaky breathing, the occasional choked sob. And then, suddenly, she gasped. A realization. How long? I hesitated. How long? She repeated, her voice breaking. I swallowed hard. 2 years. A strange noise came through the phone, like she was physically choking on the truth. Then, to my horror, she started laughing. Hysterically. A laugh that wasn't a laugh at all, just raw, broken disbelief. 2 years, she repeated. 2 years. Oh my God. Oh my God, I've been sleeping next to him this whole time, and her voice cracked, and then she just started sobbing. Loud, gut-wrenching sobs that I wasn't sure were ever going to stop. And that's when it hit me. If my father had been sneaking around for 2 years, then who else had he been with? I sat up straighter, my mind racing. I'd only caught him with Sophia. But men like him? They don't just cheat once. If he was willing to betray his own wife with his own son's wife, what else was he capable of? Mom, I said carefully, my throat dry. Have you ever suspected anything before? With Dad? Silence. Then she let out a soft, broken breath. Oh my God. I felt my stomach drop. Mom? She sniffled. Hi, I always thought I was being paranoid, she whispered. You know how your dad is. Charming. Friendly. Always so easygoing. But sometimes things didn't add up. Business trips that didn't make sense. Long nights at the office when I knew he had no work left to do. And there was this one time, years ago. I found lipstick on his collar. It wasn't mine. Did you ask him about it? She let out a weak laugh. Of course. And he had an answer. Always had an answer. Said it must have been from some woman at the office who hugged him. Said I was overthinking it. And I believed him. I chose to believe him. I clenched my fists. Jesus Christ. She sucked in a shaky breath. What if Sophia isn't the only one? I hadn't even fully processed the first betrayal, and now I had to consider that this might not even be the betrayal. Then another thought hit me. Mom, I said carefully. Have you ever gotten tested? She went quiet. I continued. For STDs. The silence stretched for so long that I thought the call had dropped. But then I heard her exhale. Oh my God. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Mom, listen to me. Go get tested. Now. Don't wait. If Dad has been sleeping around, she made a strangled sound in her throat. I have to go, she whispered, and then she hung up. I stared at my phone, my mind buzzing with thoughts I did not want to have. I needed answers. I needed to see my father. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, not even bothering to text him first. I wasn't going to give him time to prepare. When I pulled up to my parents' house, my mother's car was gone. Probably on her way to a clinic. Good. She didn't need to be here for this. I stepped up to the front door and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Then the door swung open, and there he was. My father. The man I had once respected. He looked like hell. His shirt was wrinkled, half untucked, his hair a mess. His eyes were red, like he'd been drinking. But when he saw me, he sighed, rubbing his face like this was nothing more than an inconvenience. Son, I punched him. Hard. He stumbled back, clutching his nose, blood dripping onto his shirt. Jesus Christ. I stepped inside, slamming the door behind me. You don't get to call me that anymore. He wiped the blood from his nose, shaking his head. I know you're angry. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Angry? No. Angry is when your favorite team loses. Angry is when someone cuts you off in traffic. What I'm feeling. I took a step closer, my fists clenched. That's hatred. He sighed again, like I was overreacting. Like I was just some kid throwing a tantrum. Look, he muttered, I messed up. I know that. But this is between me and Sophia. You don't, me and Sophia? I repeated, stunned. That's all this is to you? Some affair? You didn't just betray my marriage, you betrayed your own. You destroyed our family. Our entire family. Do you even understand what you've done? He opened his mouth, but I wasn't finished. Mom's getting tested, I said flatly. His face drained of color. What? I folded my arms. You heard me. If you've been screwing around for years, there's a real chance you gave her something. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I didn't, don't. Don't lie to me. Not now. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You don't understand, son. I took a step forward. Then explain it to me. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He wouldn't look at me. Coward. Finally, after what felt like forever, he whispered, Sophia wasn't the first. I felt my heart stop. I swallowed hard. How many? Silence. Then, in a voice so soft it made my skin crawl, he said, I don't know. I don't know. I wanted to hit him again. Wanted to break every goddamn bone in his body. Instead, I took a deep breath. Well, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Mom's about to find out. And then I turned and walked out. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I drove back home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The anger wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting worse. The more I replayed my father's words, I don't know, the more I felt the fire in my chest grow. I didn't even know where Sophia had gone. She'd bolted the moment I kicked her out, but she hadn't called or texted. Maybe she was with him. Maybe she was holed up in some cheap motel, crying over what she had done. Like I cared. What I did care about was my mother. She had been married to him for 35 years. Built a life with him. Had me with him. And he had thrown it all away for what? Cheap thrills? A moment of excitement? I wanted to tell myself that this was the worst of it. That I had uncovered the ugliest part of this betrayal, and now all that was left was the fallout. I was wrong. I got the text later that night, just as I was staring at the empty side of my bed where my wife used to sleep. It was from my mother. Come to the house. Now. No explanation. No details. Just those 4 words. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys and left. When I arrived at my parents' house, I heard voices before I even reached the door. Shouting. My mother's voice sharp, furious. My father's voice pleading, desperate. I stepped inside and froze. The living room was chaos. My mother was standing in the center of the room, throwing papers at my father. Documents. Receipts. Some old, some new. And standing in the corner, watching everything unfold with wide eyes, was my father's secretary. What the hell is this? I asked, stepping forward. My mother spun around, her face red and blotchy from crying. She pointed at the papers scattered across the floor. It's proof, she spat. Proof that he's been lying to me for years. My stomach churned. What do you mean? She grabbed a paper from the floor and shoved it into my hands. It was a hotel receipt. For a stay dated 5 years ago. I swallowed hard. My mother let out a dry, humorless laugh. You were right, she said. Sophia wasn't the first. Not even close. And do you want to know how I found out? Huh? She turned to the secretary. Go ahead. Tell him. The young woman shifted uncomfortably. I couldn't keep quiet anymore, she whispered. I've worked for your father for 6 years, and I knew. I knew. She shook her head, eyes glistening with guilt. I should have said something sooner, but my father cut her off. You had no right to, shut up. My mother screamed so loudly that my ears rang. You don't get to talk. She turned back to me, her chest heaving. Your father has been cheating on me for at least a decade. I found financial records, secret credit card charges, withdrawals from a second account I didn't even know existed. And this little angel over here. She gestured wildly to the secretary. She finally grew a conscience and told me about all the women. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. How many? The secretary's eyes darted to my father. She hesitated. Then she whispered, at least 6 that I know of. The room spun. I looked at my father. Is this true? He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He just sat there on the couch, head in his hands. He started, but I couldn't hear it. I turned to my mother. I'm so sorry. She shook her head. Don't you dare apologize. You're the only reason I found out the truth. Then the front door swung open. And in walked Sophia. She looked like hell. Her hair was a mess, her eyes swollen from crying. The moment she saw the scene in front of her, papers everywhere, my mother standing there like a storm about to destroy everything in her path, she froze. What's going on? She asked, her voice hoarse. My mother turned and lunged. I barely had time to react before she was on Sophia, grabbing her by the arms. You ruined my life, my mother screamed. You took my husband away from me. My family. My son. I had to pull her off. I wrapped my arms around her and yanked her back, and she sobbed into my chest, her body shaking. Mom, I whispered. She's not worth it. Sophia stood there, tears running down her face. I didn't mean. I let go of my mother and rounded on Sophia. You didn't mean to what? I snapped. To sleep with my father? To betray me? To destroy our family? She wiped her face. I was lonely. I laughed. Loud and bitter and sharp. You were lonely? Oh, that's rich. And what? My father was just there to keep you company. She nodded, sniffling. He made me feel wanted. I lost it. I stepped toward her, my hands clenched into fists. Do you even hear yourself? Do you understand what you've done? I loved you. I gave you everything. And you threw it all away for him? She sobbed harder. I made a mistake. No, I shook my head. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. A mistake is buying the wrong kind of milk. This was a choice. Over and over again, for 2 years, you chose to do this. She opened her mouth, but I didn't want to hear it. I turned back to my father. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything. He lifted his head, and for the first time, I saw guilt. True, raw guilt. I lost you both, didn't I? He murmured. I didn't answer, because he already knew. The divorce was brutal. Sophia tried to fight for the kids, but I had everything: the proof, the infidelity, the financials. She didn't stand a chance. I got full custody. My mother filed for divorce too. I helped her with the lawyers. She took half of everything, more actually, because she had the receipts. My father? He lost everything. His wife. His son. His money. Sophia tried to contact me, of course. Calls, texts, emails. I never answered. One day, a few months later, she showed up at my house, begging me to take her back. I looked her dead in the eye and said, I'd rather set myself on fire. Then I shut the door. It's been a year. The pain is still there, but it's not as sharp. My mother is healing. My kids are happy. And me? I'm free. I thought losing my wife would break me. Instead, it saved me.